from then on it was just a sort of guerrilla warfare. It wasn't, you know, as the years sort of dragged on, the Vietcong become more and more sort of active and things like that. So it, and in the end we were averaging 4, 5 contacts a week. So it was full on.
How did you
and each day would change. You know, you'd come across enemy, you'd come across enemy bunker systems, you'd come across dead bodies, and I was so naive. You know, I said I was 21, and I was the oldest in my section, and yet I was so damn naive. And then, you know, when they'd found out I'd been to Vietnam, it was especially the hippies with their drug habits and that, they called me a baby killer. And that's when I decided I'd had enough. So I ended up beating the hell out of about 4 of them. And at one stage there I think they were going to have me for assault. But after I'd sort of taken my anger out on 4 of them, I decided I wasn't coming back and I wasn't invited back. So, and you know, the main aim was to go and do our 12 months duty and then get home in one piece. And unfortunately that sort of didn't happen with all of us.
So I understand you actually grew up in Brisbane, Tony.
That's correct, yeah.
So you returned to Malaysia from Borneo?
Yes, we had, I think I had about 7 or 8 months left to serve, to come up to our 2 years when we come back from Borneo. And then what had happened was they decided to take the single chaps and were the regulars and single national servicemen. They gave everyone a choice to go back to Australia to reinforce the battalions required for Vietnam. So a lot of the guys that were with us in Borneo sort of went to Vietnam very early at that stage. I wasn't picked for the simple reason I was married, you know, with a young child. And but while we were there, they said, well, when we go back, we've got about 9 months back in Australia, and then our battalion is due for Vietnam anyway. So we were going to Vietnam, but it's just the fact I didn't go as a singer. I wasn't picked because I'd been married over there, but all my mates that I'd sort of joined with, those that sort of didn't have their time, you know, their 3 years or the 6 years running out, were going home to go to Vietnam. So it was mainly just the married group stayed there. And then we've got another lot of national servicemen who'd actually come to reinforce but hadn't been to Borneo. So you had another group. So I met another group of national servicemen, which I served with for those 9 months till we got back to Australia. Then when we got back to Australia, and that we got another group again. So we were, you know, the turnover was phenomenal in the end.
Is there anything of that 9 months that you spent in Malaysia with that next group of nashos that you'd like to explore?
Well, we lost one of our best swimmers. We lost in a tin mine crossing. We were out on operations and that, and it was his job. What normally happens was he was to have a light rope around his waist, and he was to swim this tin mine, which was quite a big tin mine. And he was to get to the other side and then pull the big heavy rope over and secure it. And then we were sort of to strip off and float all our gear and our weapons and all that across this tin mine over this rope. And he didn't get very far. It was probably straight after lunch. And we had no safety boat out, even though it was an exercise. And he disappeared. We lost him. He come off the end of the rope, and it was a while before they found him. And that was sort of a bit of a shock, you know, because he was well liked. He was our best company swimmer, because we used to have competitions. So that was a sort of a bit of an eye opener and a bit of a shock.
When were you put on that course?
It was a course. It was like for substantive corporal. You've got to go and do your training, you know, and to learn how to drill guys on parade and you know, different sort of, you know, man management, all that sort of thing. So yeah, so I had to go and do that course.
Was that in Malaysia?
Yeah, and I didn't get my corporals till I got back to Australia. As soon as I got back to Australia, I was promoted to corporal, and then sent up to Canungra as an instructor to put the battalion through to go to Vietnam, which was another lot of national servicemen. So that was a sort of.
Can you tell me about the corporal's course in Malaysia?
What I remember of it was a lot of drill involved, and then you had to take what they had, a quarter guard. We had our own guards on the gate each night. It was a quarter guard. You had 10 men, or they put 11 men on, and they'd have like a stick orderly on. What it was, they had this the company policy that even though you had to do guard duty, they put an extra man on guard duty, and you'd be assessed on your drill and your dress, and if you sort of were picked for your drill and your dress on the quarter guard, you were stood down for the night. So you didn't do the guard, and also during the day, you're selected to do probably a job for the RSM or something like that. So you actually didn't do the guard. You didn't maintain the gate, which was good. And our policy was that if you were lucky enough to score it 3 times, you're excused for guard for the rest of the year. And I used to take a lot of pride in my uniform, and I'd had my I'd shine my bayonet up till it was chromed, and I'd spray all my magazines and bone, spit polish my belts and all that sort of thing. So I spent a lot of time and effort on my uniforms, and I picked it up 3 times in Woodside, and then when I said to the CSM, I said, "Oh, am I excused now for 12 months?" He said, "No." He said, "We start all over again in Malaysia." So I picked it up again in Malaysia, and then after that I got promoted to Lance Corporal, so I wasn't sort of in the running. Then I had to take the guard and remain with the guard. So I never really sort of got my free 12 months from guard. So I always sort of, but anyway, it was most enjoyable. But the corporal's course was mainly. I think there was a little bit of study behind it. There was some exams. There was man management, and then you had to take people on weapon drill. And so, in other words, what the instructors, what your senior NCOs and all that were instructing you to do, you were then in a position where you instructed the new private that come along, sort of thing. So, so it was just a further training, to pass on your experience to the next guy. And as I said, there was a lot of national servicemen coming through that were, some of them were officer material. Even one of the groups that I had with me when I went to Vietnam, he had a Bachelor of Arts. He was no fool, but he didn't want to be an officer, But so these kids were not only well educated, they were keen for promotion. So and if you sort of didn't want to keep up with them, that you lagged behind. So,
how did you get back to Australia?
We flew home. They flew us back home as families. I said I was married then. I went back to Nog and I bought a war service home in Brisbane. In Chermside, and but I never saw much of it. As I said, we not only once we hit Enoggera and that, I was and got promoted. I was sent to Canungra, up on the border, to train the battalion to go to Vietnam. So, out of the 9 months, I think I saw my home about 4 or 5 times, and my second child was born while I was there. My boy Wayne. And I never even got to see him born at the hospital, which I wanted to do. And he was born a couple of months before I went to Vietnam. And I nearly lost him. He had about 5 hernias in the groin. And I nearly lost him, actually. But, so he was still sort of sick when I left for Vietnam. But there wasn't a lot I could do. We were all set to go and that. But I got a new group of national servicemen. I had 8 national servicemen with me in Vietnam. There was only myself and my 2 or 3 regular soldiers, and but that 8 national servicemen, you couldn't wish for better soldiers.
Did it put pressures on your relationship being away during your
Yeah, I think
pregnancy?
it did. It was a lot of stress for my wife, especially when I got wounded over there, because they didn't know what happened. The army sort of, the information they were sending home was different from what the Red Cross had, and so that was a sort of you know, a lot of stress for my wife, and then the sick child. So yeah, it didn't. And later on, it was to cruel the marriage later on, which
well,
was a shame.
before we reached that point later on, what was it like training these nashos up for Vietnam?
Well, Canungra was. We said we spent a lot of time, you know, across the border and we tried to make it as real as possible. You know, we had sneaker courses, you know, live firing sneaker course. We'd even collect the snakes. You know, we'd get a few dangerous snakes and the big carpet snakes, and you know, when we do the lectures on snake bites and things like that, we tip this big bag of snakes out that we'd found, and then later on after the exercise, that went on for about 8 weeks, I think. We would put a group through, and then we'd have a couple of days off and prepare for the next group. So, but I did that for I think 6 or 7 months. I used to get 2 days a month off, and then when they had the bushfires up through Canungra and that, there you have to go and fight the bushfire. So at times I didn't get home for about 3 months, and you know, my daughter didn't know me for a start, you know, and then my other son was too young anyway, but I had a daughter that sort of didn't know me that well. So yeah, all those sort of things are very, very difficult.
What did you know about Vietnam?
Not a lot. Not a lot. It was just another Asian country that I was being sent to fight for my country. You know, the domino theory was sort of brought home to us. You know, if you know, the North could take the South and that, where would they go sort of next? Sort of thing. I didn't know much about the history. I sort of read the history later on. I wish now I'd have known a little bit more about it. I also wish that I would have taken more notice of things like camouflage, things like that, because the Vietcong they had it perfected. You know, they were very, very good, and you tend to take a lot of pride in your own military and your military skills. But you can also, by doing so, you can underestimate the people you're fighting. Doesn't matter who they are, and that's I found that was a very, very dangerous thing, because I had 8 national service. I had 8 guys that had never been outside of Australia before. I had 8 guys that you know, depended on me to make the right decision, and I depended on them. We all depended on each other to stay alive, and you know, the main aim was to go and do our 12 months duty and then get home in one piece. Unfortunately, that sort of didn't happen with all of us.
How about yourself? How did you feel about going away?
I was upset in one respect. I was upset on leaving my family again, because I'd said I'd been away for such a long time. But on the other hand, I was sort of I was excited in the fact that, you know, I was a regular soldier. And I was given another job to do, and I was going to a new country, a new sort of probably type of warfare, and so your concentration was mainly on that. It was, you know, you couldn't afford to think about home or anything like that. It was a concentration of getting there, doing the job properly, and hopefully you're going to get everyone home, you know. But we didn't really know what we were in for till we got there. It was a completely different. Anything that I'd ever experienced before, even though I thought I was reasonably trained, but it was nothing like that, because we got there around about the Tet Offensive, you know, and that sort of thing, and up until then, you know, the Australian units were sort of, you know, they had long tan and things like that, but from then on it was just a sort of guerrilla warfare. It wasn't, you know, as the years sort of dragged on, the Vietcong become more and more sort of active and things like that. So and in the end we were averaging 4 or 5 contacts a week. So it was full on.
How did you get up there?
We went up in the old aircraft carrier, the Sydney, and it took 10 days to get there. We sailed out of Brisbane. My sisters and that come to see me, and my wife, she stayed at home. She didn't, because she had the 2 children, so she didn't see me off. But my sisters and that come to see me, and we sailed out of Brisbane. Everyone stood on deck as we went out through the Brisbane River and that. And then from then on it was about 10 days of misery.
What was your first impression of the dad?
We were given very dry, very red mud, because you know you had the monsoon rains through there, and we were given these 3 tents. Each group, each section was given 3 tents, and the big old army canvas one, but they're covered in red mud, so they're virtually big red stained mud tents. And then you had this sandbagging around it about a little over a metre high all around the outside. Then you had these trenches outside that you're supposed to get in if you were mortared and that, but because of the torrential downfall, they'd all sort of fallen in, so they were just mud, sort of holes in the ground, mud pits, so they were useless. Then the battalion that we relieved, I think it might have been Turo or someone, they were told, I think when they come in from an operation, they're going home next day. So you can imagine what the inside the tents looked like. There was, Christmas cake and everything just left on the floor, and ammunition, and they just sort of left it as it was, took what they needed and gone. So we spent a day just sort of cleaning up and then trying to find beds and trying to just make our lives a little bit more comfortable. Then unbeknown to us, everything we just got out in a big heap and threw in the big incinerator outside. They'd made this big long incinerator out of 44-gallon drums. So everything sort of went in that, and we never give it much thought until we set it alight. And then we found there was hand grenades and shells and everything, we'd swept up off the floor. So we ended up blowing the incinerator to pieces. And in the meantime, for 2 hours, we had to hide behind the sandbags. So that was our first sort of welcome to sort of Vietnam sort of thing. And then, but the guys I had with me, they could sort of see the funny side of it. But yeah, and then we had to build we were sort of out near the firing range, looking towards the horseshoe, was where our group was. And then we had to build a new magazine. The magazine that it was all sort of built in bunker system underground, but that was all our sort of ammunition that was left behind for us. But that had all sort of, the monsoon had sort of washed all that away, so that all sort of caved in, and all the extra arms and ammunition were just underground in mud. It was just covered in muddy water, so we had not had to get that out and save it and clean it. We had to build a new bunker system before we could start operations. But within a week, I think, by the time we climatised and had everything up ship shape to our sort of standard, then we started operations. And from then on, it was quite intense.
So it sounds like things were pretty run down when you arrived.
Well, yeah, they were in a way. I couldn't really understand it, but then again, I suppose when you tell the guys, you're going home tomorrow, there was no thought of, we'll sort of clean it up and make sure everything's ship shape for the next guys. You're just glad to get home, or get out of the place and get home alive, I suppose. So you can't blame them, but it didn't. The bunkers and all that were there. It's just that I think we had a fairly high standard we sort of worked to and that. But I was a little bit sort of surprised that the trenches and that weren't, you couldn't use the damn things. But there's no way you could stop the red mud or anything like that. But it didn't take long. We had a stretch, and then I think from then on you made, I think you had a steel trunk that you took over yourself to lock anything of valuable away, because you weren't in there that long. You said we were only in 2 days a month. So you sort of set it up as comfortable as you can, made a little bedside table out of scraps and things like that. So there's about four guys to a tent. I had 3 tents, and the guys sort of made it fairly comfortable, and they outside we had stones, so we whitewashed them. So we had these white stones out the front, and then we got a couple of empty shell casings and sort of sat them up and made a sort of bit of a garden out there. And then we didn't use the steel helmets, all the M1 helmets. We never used those. So the little artist in my section, he did flower power all over him, because he was one of these, make love not war. So we had all these helmets painted in flower power sitting out the front of our 3 billets, but so we never ever wore them. So that was sort of just to brighten up the place and that. But yeah, so then we had a fairly good, we had showers and that set up, even though they're always cold showers. But we had a sort of mess sort of set up. It was livable, I'd probably been worse in exercise than that, but no, it got pretty comfortable for the time, 2 days we were there.
Do you remember your first patrol?
Yeah, most of our patrols were out on foot. It was a combination, I think. It depended on the patrol at the time, whether it was whether it was in a walking distance or whether you're going, to a different area, if they're going to take you up further north or somewhere like that. It just depends. I know anywhere we went with the APCs, I wasn't sort of really happy with the armoured personnel carriers because there was 2 things wrong. They could hear you coming, and susceptible to mines, which quite a few of them were blown up, and then the fact you had that once they sort of left the hard ground, hit the rice paddies, they tend to bog. So I can't remember in the 8 months that I was there that we could successfully say, yeah, we got from A to B in an APC. We started off all right, and then we'd get bogged halfway through, so we'd end up walking to our objective anyway. So and then I don't think the guys in the APC wanted us to dirty them anyway, or cake them in mud or something. But I don't know. But they were a great asset, to us in battle. But it was just that I can never remember getting from A to B, especially when we hit the rice paddies. They tend to bog. But when they were needed, they were good, especially to hide behind. So,
what happened on your first patrol?
I can't sort of, we did so many, I can't sort of pin it down and say, well, look, this is what happened on my first patrol, but we...
How many patrols did you do while you were there?
Oh, look, I lost count. It said we were a month on each operation was almost a month. And then in that month you'd move from one side of the country to the other, and each day would change. You'd come across enemy, you'd come across enemy bunker systems, you'd come across dead bodies, and I was so naive. I said I was 21, and I was the oldest in my section, and yet I was so damn naive. And we'd come across all these bodies and I used to think, God, there's a lot of women being killed up here. I said, there's a lot of these Vietcong are women, and I thought there's a hell of a lot being killed up here. And then, and then I was told, they're not women, they're men. It says, your hair and your nails keep growing long after you're dead. And being in the tropics up there, the hair was nearly down to their, down past their shoulders. So you'd find 5 or 6 bodies, and they had hair, shoulder length hair, and nails like big, but they were all men. And it's just the fact that the nails and hair grew long after they were dead. And but that's how naive I was. I think that, oh God, all these women being killed, but it wasn't that at all. It was just.
How did you operate on patrols in Vietnam?
We always operated with you always took out 8 out of your 10. You never went on operations with a full team complement. Never. You always left 2 guys behind, to reinforce the group back there. You always sort of had probably one company back, but you always had to have all your area of responsibility all had to be manned, so you had to leave people behind to do that. So you never operated with a full 10-man team. You always had roughly 8, and sometimes if you're lucky you might have been given a medic or signaller, so you might end up with 9, but most times you worked in your group of 8, and but you're still required to carry the gear, the gear for your machine guns, and I and the little chap I had that used to be the number 2 on the machine gun, and by that time we were carrying the M60s, the American M60s, and each of us were carrying an extra 200 rounds. We had them in bandoliers across, like the Mexican cross bandoliers, and we all carried about 200 rounds for our guns. And then I had some problem with my little 2IC, kept throwing the spare barrel, what they call a golf bag, and it used to sort of get caught round his neck and that, and we'd be, sort of creeping through the jungle, and next minute I know this golf bag's coming in over the top of my head, and and I'd say, look, this can't go on, and he'd end up bending the sights on the barrel. And I said, look, this can't go on. He said, look, I'd rather carry the full M60 than carry the damn barrel. He said, it's just a real pain, So I said to the guys in the section, I said, what do you think of the idea, number 1 and number 2 carrying M60 each? And I said, it'll mean extra rounds, and they said, oh, that's good, we don't mind that at all. So my number 1 and number 2 had a full machine gun each, so we were carrying something like an extra 1,200 rounds for our machine gun. But God, when we needed it, that certainly paid off. I'll never regret that decision. When we got into some strife, those 2 machine guns got us out. So probably wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but God, it saved us. So that was something the guys wanted to do, and we carried the extra rounds, and those extra rounds too saved my life, because when I got hit in that, I got hit in the rounds, or part of the rounds were hit. So it was a bit like a bulletproof vest for me. But yeah, we had that, and then and the guys, they saved my life more than once. I had the 8 guys, even my 2IC was very, very good. But the 8 guys were soldiers, and each man a hero, I tell you. The little guy I used to call Sleepy, he was one of my riflemen, but he was also my medic. He carried the medical kit, and he was also my guy with the M79 rocket launcher. Very, very good with it. He was the guy I said could put this round in a bucket 200 metres away. He was very good, but he had a problem. It was a medical problem, but whether they picked it up in the army or not, I don't know. But
we were just talking about Sleepy, and it sounds to me like he had a bit of narcolepsy.
Yeah, it's and sort of I didn't sort of pick it up. I didn't pick it up on training when we were back in Kananga or anything like that. But it certainly come to life in Vietnam, and so then when I take him out on patrol, I had this problem where I put him, because I couldn't sort of put him between me and the rest of the guys down the back, because if we were sort of separated at any time, we had a contact and that, and I wanted to pass messages back, and that they'd get to Sleepy, and that the other guys from him on would never get it. So I had this problem, and so I said to him, I said, look, what I'm going to do, I said, I'm going to put you as my second scout. I said, if you bloody will go to sleep, the first thing is going to be my boot right up your behind. And I said that's the only way I can sort of keep you awake. I said, you can't go to sleep on me on operations, So that's where I put him, and you wouldn't read about it. This kid, he not only saved our life, but even as a platoon medic, what he did. First off, we were on an operation, and then in the afternoon we pulled off the side, or we're actually walking along the side of a roadway. We were never allowed to use roads, so we walked in the jungle alongside this road. And about 5 o'clock they decided we were going to sort of harbour for the night. And just as we were sort of making this decision, a woman come along the road with a little baby on the thing. And normally anyone we sort of come across, we'd send back. We'd sort of, if we thought they were a risk, we'd blindfold them out and send them back on a chopper for interrogation, especially if we thought we were in an area they weren't supposed to be. Anyway, we thought, oh, well, what's the harm, the woman and a child? It's probably not a problem, She's probably one of the locals from the village or something like that. So we just, hurried her on. And so we decided we'd ambush that roadway for the night. And like every night, it was just downpour after downpour, and you're just lying there cold and wet and miserable, watching the road. You know that no one's going to come along anyway. But anyway, that's how the night eventuated. So next morning they said, look, you've got to be at a certain area, and the only way you can do that is get on the road. Said you won't make it in time, And we had to be there, I think, as a company. So the boss said to me, he said, look.
Why did you have to make it somewhere?
Yeah, we had to be in a meet up with the other part of the battalion or something, but we had to be there in a certain time, and we weren't going to get there in that time if we stuck to our training, like, you know, chopped our way through the scrub. They told us to get out on the track, you know, and head down and bum up sort of thing, and be there by a certain time. And the boss came to me and said, he said, look, he said, I want you, this morning he said, I want you as lead platoon. And, you know, he gave me the good reference and that we had to get. And because we chopped down on, said we were only taking 8 men out of the 10 out, at times I didn't have my 2 scouts up front. The little scout I used to have was already, I sort of picked up in Vietnam. He'd been there 6 months. Little Bluey Maguire, who was killed not long after. And I didn't have him out front for some reason. I must have left him back at base, but so I was cut down to the 1. So I said, you're my forward scout. And so there was him and then myself. And I said, every time you put your head down, because if he wasn't going to sleep, he looked down. He wouldn't look ahead. I said, look, you've got to keep your eyes up and look ahead. I said, I want you to see what's ahead. I said, all you'll see is the feet of the guy that kills you. You know, I said, if you keep putting your head down, I said, it's gonna kill you. So we got on the track, and within a couple of 100 yards, down with the head, you know, and I thought, God, I'm gonna kick you right up the behind. And just as I was about to get close to him, you know, he stops, and he called me forward, and he said, look here. And what it was the end of it was a clacker for a claymore mine, you know, which was the mines that we use, American mines. But there was this clacker in the side of the road, turned up on its side and buried into the ground, and it had a leaf on top, and the leaf had been stuck on with a piece of sort of like a little plaster, and during the heavy downpour it had washed off, you know. And so I brought up we had some disposal experts with us, you know, that travelled with us, and I brought him up, and he tracked the wire from this thing into an anthill. There's this big anthill on the side of the road, and apparently what it was that night, the woman had sort of seen us there, knew we were there, and probably thought, if they use the track tomorrow, you know, I'll let my Vietcong friends know. And they'd come in over night time, and they'd built this big this homemade mine. It was all made out of American ration cans and that, filled with 9 or 10 pound of plastic explosive, and it had old bits of tin and ball bearings and nails and glass and God knows what in, but it was monstrous. And they chopped out this anthill and put this mine in and put the mud back, and did a great job, because you couldn't pick it. You just think it was an anthill. And the idea was to step on this clacker, which made its own, like it was when you squeeze them, they make a centrifugal spark, you know, a little wheel that goes around, and it sets off the charge in it, and that's what sets off the claymore mine. And they use this, they were going to use this to set this big Vietcong off. And had he not seen it, if I didn't step on it, the next guy would have. So it would have wiped, you know, probably 8 or 9 of us out, because it was that big. Because when it went off, it was like a bomb. When they blew it, it was massive.
So you actually did blow it?
Yeah, he come up and blew it. And
how do you do that?
How?
Do you chuck a rock at it? What do you do?
No. The guy, the bomb disposal expert, tracked it through the wire, and then sort of dug round and found it. And they put another sort of a thing on the outside and blow it. He just blew it to pieces. But you see, you know, he said it was freshly made. He said it had been made overnight. You know, you could see where the mud hadn't been done by the ants. You could tell it had been carved out and repacked, but it had just been wet and stuck back in. He said you could see the finger marks and all that sort of thing. So it had been done that night, because it rained 2 or 3 times a day. So the woman, you know, I'd say, said, well, look, you know, the soldiers are there, and if they're going to use the track, you know, we'll put the mine there. But had he not had his, had he not been looking down, we'd have lost some good troops that morning.
So did you tell him to keep his eyes up from then on?
No, left him alone after that, because he saved us there. And that same little bugger, I watched him in a contact where you know, he left his weapon behind, picked up his medical kit, leaped over the log, raced out, got this guy who'd been shot in the behind, put him back on his shoulders and brought him back in under fire, and that was Sleepy, you know. So that's just, you know, you just can't sort of judge people, you know, at first sort of thing. You think, oh, well, you know, this guy I'm going to have problems with, but he was a soldier, you know, and he was a kid. You know.
Did you make it on time to the rest of the troops?
Yeah, I think we did. We weren't that late anyway, but I think it was a bit of a shock, the fact that, so, you know, we didn't like using tracks. We were trained not to use tracks. We didn't like using them anyway. And, you know, it was just that first, I think it was first and only time that we actually, you know, decided to use it. And we'd ambushed that night. And, yeah, so that was a bit of a shock. So, but it was a good sort of warning too, you know. If you use tracks, you know, you're making it so easy to step on a mine. And we ran into a minefield later on, which we didn't even know was there. But it was our Allied forces. It was American minefield, you know, that they'd laid. But none of our maps were marked minefield. So, you know, if wherever the Americans or anyone else were putting them, no one was telling us.
Well, how can you get into the middle of a minefield and first of all not know about it and then know about it?
Well, we'd sat down for lunch. You know, they'd actually drop these mines from the air. They were like a little butterfly bomb, and what the idea was, they'd saturate an area with them, and these things were supposed to go into the ground. And once they were in the ground, they were sort of preset, and then you'd come along and you'd walk on them, and the idea was that they could put them anywhere, and the Vietcong sort of couldn't get them out. No, it was to stop the Vietcong going from one point to the next. But the Vietcong used to come on with a little fork and dig them out and replant them somewhere else, so they could get them out, and they were good at it. But we sort of sat down for lunch, and one of the guys happened to be sitting like a bit of an anthill, and he's sitting there and he's looking down. You could see this sort of yellow plate that he was sitting on, and he said, "Well, what's this?" And he says, "They're all over the place, you know." And that's when we realised they were these mines that they drop from the air.
What are they called again?
Well, I call them butterfly bombs because they're little yellow, like little fins on, because some of them were hanging in the trees. They hadn't gone into the ground. But we were actually, you know, we were right in amongst it, and it was sort of, it was like an open area. So from then on we had to sort of feel our way, dig our way out, you know, prod our way out. But while we're doing that, you know, it took hours, and here we are sort of out in the open. So we were, you know, it was a bit of a worry. We're not only in a minefield, but we were sort of, you know, we didn't know where it started, where it finished, and here we are prodding our way out into open ground, you know. So,
how do they actually get into the ground? Is it because the ground's wet that they sink in from behind?
Oh, I think just from the height they dropped them. It was something that was never ever mentioned to us. I didn't even know that sort of thing existed. You know, I didn't even know that they were using them. And as I said, any minefield, the only minefields we sort of knew about was ones sort of laid out around a perimeter of probably an operational base that you had, you know, and most of the time they were ours that we knew we'd put there, and we'd mark where they were so we could pull them back up. But most of the, you know, the things were like claymores or things like that we could put in overnight and take out next day and that, you know. But instead, all the time that I'd sort of work with any of the Allied forces, there was no such thing of having a map marked was, you know, this area is mined or is tracks mined. So that was a sort of disadvantage. And then we seemed to be working on different maps because
From the Americans?
Yeah, I actually went out on an operation, and it was the second time outside of the time I got lost on the Glen Patrol. I only ever got lost once during the daylight on map reading, and that was I was asked to lead the company out on we had to go out to this swamp area. It was going to take we thought it was going to take a few hours, but it took most of the day. And we had to go out, and we were going to lay an ambush that night in this area and then come back in the following day. And the area we had where we went out we had an area with like pampas grass, and this stuff was 7 or 8 foot high. You couldn't see over it, so and I had to I was changing guys every 5 minutes to cut through this stuff, and it's like razor wire. And this went on all day, and by the time, you know, we'd gone probably 2 or 3 kilometres, the guys had sort of lost lost the incentive to count, because you've got to count paces. You know, there was no such thing as satellite navigation or anything like this. It was all done by how many paces, so many paces, you know, equaled, so many kilometres and things like that. So, you know, by the time we'd done a couple of kilometres in the heat, and we'd gone through most of our water within the first few hours. We didn't expect, you know, we were in such horrific condition with this bloody pampas grass, and it was just grass. There was no tree. You couldn't climb a tree to sort of look for direction. So I was working on a compass bearing, and that's all I was working on, because it got to the stage where I was still on the bearing, but I didn't know where along that line that I was. You know, all I was hoping that we were going to come out somewhere, you know, so I could sort of get my bearings. And this went on all day, and the boss kept asking me where we were, and I just sort of, you know, taking a stab at the dark. And I said, you know, we're along here somewhere. And he'd say, very good, and he'd go back to the middle of the platoon. And so finally we sort of come out in the afternoon, about 5 in the afternoon, and where it come was all sort of just a dry, flat plain. And there was a big road off to our left, and there was no road on my map. And but where it was supposed to be swampland, if there was any swamp there, it had dried up with the dinosaurs. There was no swamp. And then we heard the sound of American tanks. We saw these tanks moving about, you know. So I said to the boss, well, look, you know, we're at the end of here. I said, there's no swamp here. I said, I'm on the right bearing, you know. And he said, oh, you know, and I said, there's no road, you know, on this map. I said, we don't have a road. I said, that's a major road over there. And he said, what we'll do, he said, we'll go across to the Americans and sort of see, you know, if they've got any idea, you know, where they are, to see where we are, sort of thing. And I don't forget, I'm walking off the side of the road, like on the sort of front of it, and I walk up to these guys. There's 2 Americans sitting on this tank in the middle of nowhere, could see for miles. And how they didn't see us, I don't know, but I walk right up to them. They're sitting on top of this tank, eating a meal off china plates, you know, knives and forks. And I said something to the effect, hi guys, where the hell are we? You know, and they died, you know, they you know, plates and that went everywhere, scared the living hell out of them. And they said, where the bloody hell did you come from? And I said, well, I was in Australia last time I checked, you know. Anyway, and I said, where's your sentry? You know, and they looked at me all dumbfounded and said, you know, what sentry? So they didn't have a sentry yet. But they were sitting in the middle of a road on the turret of a tank and didn't see 30 guys walk up the road alongside of them, sort of thing. So that really sort of stunned me, but it was coming on in the afternoon. So then we got with the commander and that, and we said, look, and they sort of showed us where we were, and instead of different maps altogether, you know, our Allied forces were working on 2 different sorts of maps, you know, and theirs was more sort of accurate than ours. As I said, ours didn't even have the road, so I was a bit stunned with that. I would have thought we were, you know, we would be working all on the same sort of maps, especially when you're calling airstrikes and things like that. So I was a bit stunned, you know, we weren't working on the same maps. And then we decided, the boss said, look, what we'll do, we'll stay with the Armoured Corps tonight, because they weren't going anywhere. And I said, well, look, and they said, we won't stay in, and what we'll do, we'll go out on one of their flanks, and we'll sort of harbour around their flanks, you know. And I said, well, yeah, well, that's all right. I said, but just make sure, you know, you tell them we're here, and keep reminding them we're here, because I said I would prefer to be inside with the tanks and sitting out front of the tanks, you know. And but it was unbelievable, you know. We set up for the night, and you know, we went into our normal harbour position, put our pickets out, and by 9 o'clock they decided they're going to move some tanks. So all these lights come on, and it was like Club Med, you know, all these lights, and there's tanks reversing, and I thought to myself, if anyone wants to know where you are, you know, here we are, you know. Then, and that's all the Vietcong needed, you know, to thing, because within about half an hour in come the first mortar shells, you know, in that area. But what happened was they were dropping short, and we were out the front, so we were getting the mortars that meant for the Armoured Corps. So we were glued to the ground, and then the Americans, in their wisdom, decided they're going to fire. They're going to lower the tank cannons, and they're going to fire, you know, sort of ground level. So they fired across the top of us, and for anyone that's sort of ever been sort of sitting below a tank when it fires, you know, that's probably why I've got very little hearing left today, you know, because it's just deafening, not only frightening. And I don't know how many rounds they fired there, because I don't even know what they're firing at, because all we could see was you'd hear the pop and the mortar come in. But thankfully, between the mortars and them firing, none of us got hit. But we'd sort of, by that time, we were still digging, our way, you know, still digging more than shell scrapes. We were digging in, but we had sort of, you know, trees and that around to hide behind. But that was frightening. And then
so this was all due to a lack of communication from the Americans to you lot, that they were actually going to draw attention to themselves.
Yeah, well, I suppose by moving these tanks and that of a night time was probably a normal thing to them. But we weren't used to it. We go in and the object's there. You don't make any sound and don't let people know you're there. You know, you don't turn on lights and light up the place like a neon. And they tend to sort of go into the open. They tend to go into the open and cover the bush. Well, we go into the bush and cover the open ground. So they work completely reverse. But
did this annoy you?
Well, it did. It was frightening, because I couldn't believe the fact that they'd make so much noise. You know, you could hear a tank. You know, 9 o'clock at night, you can hear a tank for miles away. So it was just a matter of, and it wasn't just 5 minutes. They were running the motors, and then they had these big lights on, and they were reversing them. You could hear them for miles away. And I thought then that this was sort of bit out of character or out of place. But it said it didn't take long. It would only be about half an hour. I suppose we got the first shells in. But I was glad, I said to finish the first light come, I said to the boss, I'll be glad to get out of here. And then we sort of left them. We said, right, that's it, we're heading back to company.
Yeah, good idea to leave them.
And then I said, well, look, now we've got, sort of got an idea where we are, and we know where company is, we're going to sort of stick to this open ground. He said, oh no, he says, we're going back through the pampas grass. And I said, oh, you've got to be joking. I said, it took us all day. He said, well, he said, that's why we come. Anyway, so we had the same thing. We were lead section again, and then, the same thing. And we got through, and then I had the compass bearing, and then after a couple of kilometres, I was somewhere along that compass bearing, because there was no way you could see. There was no way outside of having the guys count accurately, because I went crooked them, sort of getting me out of place the first time, and then it was just so hard, because you're changing the guys every 5 minutes to cut through this damn stuff, and everyone's exhausted, and then you're going through all your water, and then you're expecting them to count paces. It was almost ridiculous. So said by another couple of kilometres, I knew I was somewhere along this line, but I didn't know I could have been half a kilometre either way, either back or forward. And then in the wisdom, we got the message that company shifted. So I had to run another compass bearing onto this new position. So hopefully, that I'd eventually come out on this old position I had, and then take the new one to find company. And then we didn't sort of hit coming out. We didn't hit till about 5 o'clock, which was getting a bit late for anything. And then we got the same thing again. We got to the other end by a little after 5. And then I'd got a sort of new bearing and said, well, I hope to hell, because I hadn't known how far I was along the initial line. I thought, when I take this new one, I said, I hope to hell I'm somewhere within range, because I could have been half a kilometre either side. I could have missed them. Anyway, we sort of went on this other bearing, and then we come out into this sort of open paddock, and I thought, geez, I must be getting close, And then the boss was saying, well, where are we now with company? And I said, well, look, they've got to be here somewhere. And then I heard the sounds of Dixies being hit together, which is very unusual, because that's one thing you're trained not to do, to make noise. But I said to my scout, I said, look, head for that damn noise. Anyway, we walked right in on company. Oh, fabulous, I couldn't believe it. And then while I'm standing there, because they we put all the guys through, and they were absolutely buggered. And then the boss says to my CO, and that he said, look, great piece of navigation there, Corporal. He said, very, very well done. I thought to myself, bloody, you'd known. For the last 2 days, I've been absolutely bloody lost. Absolutely. So, yeah, that was sort of, that was unbelievable. I'd never been so lost, I think, in my life.
Was that the only time that you ever felt that you actually might be lost? Yeah.
It was the only time that I had nothing to go by. I couldn't see over this pampas grass. There was nothing to climb. I had nothing. There was nothing I could run bearings off. There was no sort of mountain I could do a retraction or anything. It was just the most difficult map reading thing I'd ever experienced. But I was a bit dumbfounded that the officer, wasn't map reading with me, which he should have been, because if anything happened to me or that, I suppose he was working on the principle that I knew where I was, and and if I said I was somewhere on this, showed him on the map, but that's where we were. So and he'd mark it on his, but I don't think it was that accurate. It was somewhere along that thing. But yeah, that was a bit of a shock. And then I had the young fellow that used to have the Bachelor of Arts. He was one of my riflemen. He kept me on my toes as well, because he always wanted to know where we were. He said, where are we now, Corp? Where are we now? And in the end, I was going to get him a map and compass of his own, because he drove me up a wall, but I think he just kept me on my toes. But that same fellow with him, he was just one of my riflemen, and we had an experience one morning where we just finished breakfast, and we'd pulled up to leave, and we'd only gone a few hundred metres, and you could, I don't know, it's just something about the morning. It was cool, and you could see the mist was about a foot off the ground. You could see it coming through the jungle. It was just one of those eerie mornings, and but it was also it was a peaceful time, but it was eerie. It was hard to describe, because it was unusual. You could see this mist rolling along ground level, so it just something felt different. Something felt wrong. Anyway, we'd only gone probably about half an hour, I suppose, and the machine gun went off up the front, up the sections, and we like hell broke loose, and we were the tail section. We were the last section of the company, and the job for my rifleman was anything like that, they were to go down and face back down where we come from, protect us from the rear. But by the time the machine gun went off, we were all on the ground, we were all in position anyway, except this Battalion Charlie. He's going round and round and round this big tree, and I said to him, "So what the bloody hell are you doing?" And he said, I'm a bit worried from where these firing's coming from. He said, wherever it's coming from, he said, I'm going to be on the other side of this tree. And I said, I don't care. I said, I want you down on the ground, face back down the bloody track we come from. I said, don't worry about which side of the tree you're going to be on. So that was all right. Then the boss sends back along the line. He says, small arms fire. So I'm thinking, we've been hit, the enemy's up front somewhere with carbines and things like that. And he said, small arms fire. And he said, what I want you to do, Corp, he said, we're under attack up the front. He said, we've got a group of Vietcong up there. And he said, I want you to do a sweep of the right. He said, I want you to go out to the right and then do a sweep and then take them out from the right-hand side. So I said to the guys, right, up and go. We swung out to the right, and as we went through the jungle, we come across this big B-52 bomb crater. Oh, it was massive. It was like a mountain, and you could tell what it was, but it was just, you just looked up into the sky, and it was just a sheer bank of dirt, and it was like a big volcano, but it was so big we had to go round it. I couldn't line up. We had to go round this thing, and it took ages. And while I'm trying to get round this, the boss kept saying, small arms fire, where are you, Corporal, where are you, Corporal? And by this time I'm halfway around, where the bloody hell do you think I am, Anyway, we'd got round this bomb crate, and then I got the guys all lined up, and I I think I had the rifle group on my left and my gunners out to the right, and I'm in the centre. And I said, righto, I said, from now on we should, you know, we're probably a couple of 100 yards, we're going to run into enemy fire if they're still there. Anyway, so we started to move forward, and then this funny sound, it was a machine gun going off, but it was an unusual sound. It was, at the time I thought something was wrong, but I didn't really know what it was. But it was an eerie sound, and then we had these big tree boughs dropping down on top as we moved through, and they sort of coming in, and you could see the fresh sap, you know, but it actually blown it to pieces off the top of the trees. But we, you know, was sort of pretty keyed up in that, and at the time it just didn't sink in. And then one of my riflemen dropped back, and I said, what are you doing? Where the bloody hell are you going? He said, I've dropped my smokes. He said, I'm going back to look for them. I said, like bloody hell yeah. I said, keep up. There's bugger the smokes. I said, we're in the middle of an assault, you know. So we get up there, and we kept moving forward, and these boughs kept coming down. And then we got up to where we saw like an open thing, the jungle had sort of stopped, and it was an open area, and here's one of the Vietcong lying down, you know, in his little black outfit, and he's lying there. And I said, right, we're going to drop here. I said, we're not going out in the open, and I didn't know whether this guy was dead or alive. And I said, we're going to stop here. And so we dropped, and I called the boss up, and what it was, there was about 4 or 5 sitting there having breakfast, and the out in the sort of open, and the first group of the company saw them and opened fire on them and hit one. And then normally they take their dead with them, but obviously they couldn't retract this guy. But the other guys actually stayed down and returned fire, but they were using a 50 calibre machine gun, and that's what we went in against. I didn't know, but what they were doing, for firing at ground level, they were firing it, but he must have been firing high, so by the time it reached us, it was going well over the top of our heads and chopping off all the trees above us, and that's what was coming down on top. But all the time my boss is screaming, small arms fire, you know, and I'm thinking we're going in against, you know, light weapons, not a 50 cal machine gun. So, and I didn't find out, because like we had to roll the body over and that, check, and then we did that, and then we went through to the other side of the clearing, and then we sort of go to ground again, and then while I'm over there, I find all these big shells, these 50 calibre machine gun shells, about 30 of them, you know. And then it dawned on me what had been happening. You know, I said, him and his bloody small arms fire. So I got this shell, and then I went back to him. I said, look, I said, you and, you know, because we got on fairly well, but you know, I said to him, you and your bloody small arms fire. I said, if you ever do that, you know, I said, I'm going to shove this shell, and you're going to know where I'm going to shove it, you know. But I was petrified, you know. I couldn't stop my knees. I had to sit down. My knees were, you know, it was unbelievable, the feeling. But yeah, that was an eye opener. To walk in against a 50 calibre machine gun, 8 of us standing up, walking in against it. God, you know, had I known, we wouldn't have got off the ground. But yeah, that was just sort of things that happen, you know. And yeah, and I wouldn't have known had we not found the shell casings. So that was the you know, the bit I call pigs can fly too, you know, when I wrote my book, and walking in against a 50 calibre machine gun. But the funny thing is that the fact that, you know, my Tailin wanted to be on the other side of the tree wherever the rounds were coming from, and the other guy in the middle of the assault wanted to go back and look for his smokes, you know. So that was just strange. And another sort of similar incident when we put in the first Anzac Battalion attack in Vietnam. And the day before, the New Zealanders had struck a group of regular forces, Vietcong, in a big bunker system in between a big ravine. They're pretty well dug in.
Is this you being part of that Anzac?
Yeah. And so they decided, and the New Zealanders had sort of been beaten back, and the Vietcong didn't like they were going to leave. So they said, what we'll do, we'll retract everyone and we'll bomb the area.
You were saying?
Yeah, the battalion attack. So they decided to cease the assault, and they brought in an airstrike, and I think they brought in the airstrike for most of the day. You know, they napalmed the area and bombed the hell out of it, and then they said, what we're going to do, we're going to assault it tomorrow. We're going to have an all-out assault, you know, as a Anzac battalion, the Kiwis on one side and the Aussies on the other, and it's really, you know, the whole thing, you know, the back of my hair, like when we're sort of in the middle of the hair, sort of back of my head, the hair stood on up the back of my head. It the first time we'd ever fixed bayonets for a start, you know, and that really sort of, you know, had my eyes open. I thought, God Almighty, you know, going to be this close, you know, got to fix bayonet.
What actually is the target?
The target, we were going to assault these bunkers. You know, that was the whole idea, but, you know, we didn't sort of have any idea what the bombing, you know, didn't even think of what the bombing would have done, you know, at the time they were in there bombing it and napalming it. We didn't sort of find that out till we got there, but we were still a fair way back. And what they did, they formed us up, well, about 5 in the morning, and it was still dark when they, and it was an unusual tactic. It was the only one I'd sort of ever been in before, we all had these little lights each. They gave us these little torches with a coloured light on it, and the idea of, you know, all these different colours is where, you know, you'd line up on these lights, you know, and you think, Jesus, this is strange. We're all out here with these little lights and look like bloody blowflies, you know, glowworms or something like that, and we're all out here and they've got the enemy somewhere out front and we're all out here with these little coloured lights, you know, so if there was any enemy out there, I don't know what they thought. But it was quite strange. And normally you'd sort of be all together, you'd have your toggle ropes, you know, you'd all be sort of joined together with this toggle ropes, left and right sort of thing, but we didn't have them this time, we didn't use them. And we had these little lights, so, you know, you'd look and you'd for quite a few hundred yards, you'd see these lights, so you knew you had guys lined up left and right. And my section was the last section on the end, on the left, you know, so it was just the guys that were far left were my riflemen, you know, and that was it, that was the end of our sort of thing. But from, you know, to the right and that, you had the rest of the, you know, the battalion. So we were right down the end. And then as soon as daylight came, they said, right, fix bayonets, and away we went, and we sort of walked a sort of brisk pace, but in that stage we're still in jungle. And then sort of as we sort of, because it took us a while to sort of get to the objective, but as we're sort of moving forward, we come across the trenches the Kiwis had dug the day before, and you could see all these boxes, they had hand grenade boxes, so they were throwing hand grenades, you know, by the box full. So I thought, God, we're in trouble here, you know, sort of thing. And then instead we'd fix bayonets for the first time. Then as we sort of, the pace sort of quickened, and then all of a sudden we had an explosion behind us. So I thought, oh God, we're under attack. And what it was, one of the guys to the right, one of the other section, got his M79 rocket launcher caught in the vines, and instead of sort of stopping and releasing the weapon, he decided he'd keep going, you know, and he kept pulling the damn thing, and it went off. And they arm about 18 metres out of the barrel, so this thing went off, armed, and dropped down behind us. So a few of us, you know, got covered in dirt and scared the hell out of it. So by this time the pace started to quicken, because we didn't know what the hell had happened. And then the guy started screaming. He got some bug flew in his ear, you know, and so he had this buzzing sound in his ear. And his mate telling him he's going to get it out with a stick. This is all in the middle of an assault. And as we're sort of getting closer, this tree snake, I'd never seen a tree snake sort of move from vine to vine. And you could see it coming through on the left, and it was about eye level. And that absolutely disintegrated my troops. You know, we could see this thing travel across the front of us, you know, and none of us like snakes. So my line on the left, and as it went through, the lines just shattered, you know, and I'm trying to get my troops to line back up on the left, and then as the snake's passing across, everyone else on the right's, you know, sort of shattering. Then after sort of that sort of thing, by this time, you know, our eyes were as big as saucers. And then we pushed on forward, and as we sort of got up to where the bunker system was, where this big ravine was, there was nothing. It was just quicksand. You know, they'd bombed, you know, they'd bombed the hell out of it, and it was just, if there was a ravine there, it'd been buried under tons of dirt. You know, I saw a dead deer, and that was about it. But as we hit this area, like where the ravine was, it was just, the sand was so soft, the dirt was so soft you'd drown in it. And we sort of, it just stopped everyone in their tracks.
And it had been napalmed as well.
Yeah.
So there was no foliage anywhere?
There was nothing, just this soft sand. It was like, I said, I've never been in anything like it before. It just, you know, you couldn't move. It was like trying to walk up a sand hill. It was, you hit it and that's where you stayed. You couldn't move. You couldn't go forward because, you know, it was just so soft. And it just put everyone just a dead stop. So if there was any bunker system or if there was any Vietcong left, they were buried under tons and tons of things. So that was our Anzac Battalion attack, the first Anzac Battalion attack.
Did you meet up with the New Zealanders as they came from the other side?
No. I think all that I could see, we were one sort of flank. There was just a straight line. So we were my group was the last on the left, and there was hundreds of guys out to my right. But I don't know whether they were attacking it from any other direction. There was no one in the world any was going to meet up because we wouldn't have been able to cross this soft sand, you know. But you couldn't even recognise the place, you know. If it was a valley, it was just unrecognisable, you know. And if it was a deep ravine or a bunker system, it's just unbelievable, the damage. But they'd bombed it for hours and hours, you know. But there was just nothing left. There was just no way you could move through it. It was just, we just come to a stop. But it was just sort of an anticlimax, you know. We'd sort of lined up so early in the morning, and you know, we'd sort of psyched ourselves up for this attack. And then when they said, you know, fix bayonets, I thought, God Almighty, you know, that was frightening. But and then all these other things happened in between, you know, with the M79 going off and the guy getting the bug in his ear, and then this snake, you know, the guys were more worried about this bloody snake than what was out the front. You know, it was quite funny. Was it a relaxed night after that? Yeah, it was good. And it was, you know, it was sort of having a laugh over the way the line shattered and the fact that the guy had set off the M79, because we thought, you know, someone was firing at us, but it was our own guys, you know, setting off the M79. So, jeez, we were lucky. But that was sort of it. And then they were the sort of things, you know, that sort of cropped up. Every day was different. And the things that we come across, a lot of the old bunker system like the Vietcong had, I think what impressed me the most was the camouflage. Their ability at camouflage was absolutely excellent. You know, a lot of the things, like you might see a place where the bunker system had been sort of washed away, but then when you had a look at the system they were using, you know, how far they had their sort of sentry out, and he'd crawl all the way out there and all be underground, and he probably had, you know, like two little marks near a tree stump sort of thing, you know, but he could go right out, he could be looking at you, you know, 200 metres out.
Can you describe the situation in which your first member was wounded?
What had happened was it was out in an area which they call the Firestone Trail, and what that was, it was an area that was being cleared of at least 200 metres of the jungle was cut away, and it was just laid bare, and the idea of that could be patrolled day and night, and the idea was to stop the Vietcong crossing from one part of the jungle to the other. And so they'd clear this 200 metre strip of jungle, and they'd patrol it by choppers and that, and sort of any Vietcong caught out in the open, you know, would be annihilated, sort of thing. So, but to do that, they had to put people out there with bulldozers during the day. It was only a day operation, and what was happening, that these guys were sort of out there by themselves in the dozer, and all they really had was a tin helmet, a flak jacket, and a 9mm pistol, and a bit of gauge wire, sort of, you know, around the thing. There was no sort of armour plate or no sort of protection for them, so they were easy targets for the Vietcong with the RPGs and that, the rocket launchers. So they decided that they had to have a group out there during the day to protect the dozer drivers. So we sort of had a week on doing different operations, and 1 week for us was to be out front protecting the dozer guy. And what we would do, I would leave one of my guys sort of back, so that when the trees, when the dozer sort of worked up to us, we'd be sort of in a circle shape around him out front. We had guys on the side and the majority of us out the front and that. And when the trees started to sort of drop down to the guy we had at the back, he would notify us, and then we'd move a couple of 100 metres further on, and that's the way we sort of operating. So we were there just sort of sitting watching, and just so that no one could sort of sneak up and do the dozer drivers. So they tied us up during the day, the Vietcong. Then they decided, well, we can't get him during the day. What we'll do is, where he's sort of finished that evening and starts again in the morning, we'll go in and we'll plant some mines. So we'll get him with a mine, so they're putting these fairly big mines to blow the dozers up. So then we decided, well, we've got to be out there of a night time as well. So we'd set up ambushes of a night time.
Was anybody injured with these mines?
Not that I'm aware of, because we put them there. We knew. The Vietcong mine, yeah, I think so. Initially, I think they must have to blow up some dozers. Otherwise, we wouldn't be required to be out there. I think they lost a few construction workers and that. So to stop them sort of planting the mines, we ambushed it over night time. So they tied us up day and night, and that way we sort of protected our dozers and that. And this night we got sent out late in the afternoon to set up an ambush position. But what had happened was the dozer driver hadn't sort of finished late, and instead of packing all the or pushing all the logs and what he'd knocked down, instead of pushing them all in the centre and have the clear strip that you could sort of see what you're ambushing, the logs had just left where they fell. So when we sort of got out to that area, we sort of had to climb over logs and there was big caterpillar troughs in the sand, and it was pouring with rain. So it was a real sort of, it was a cow of an area to work in, and said it was pouring with rain, late in the evening, starting to get dark, and we couldn't really set up a proper ambush position because of the way that the place had been left. So my boss decided, he said, look, I want you to put your machine gun up on top of that big mound that they got there, and he said just spread the guys out from below that around in between these logs and that. And he said, I'll get at the base with the batman. He said, I'll get at the base of that. And then for some reason or other, the other section that was with us, he split us up, and he sent them out further out front. So when it got dark, we thought, well, they're somewhere out front. We didn't know where. I didn't know where. All I knew that they were out in front of me, and I couldn't see the value in that. But they had a little handheld radio, and they probably in contact with the boss. But as I said, I'd sort of formed a semicircle with a few guys that I had, and a couple of them got out in one of these dozer tracks, thinking that that'd be their sort of position for the night. But the heavy rain sort of put a stop to that. That filled up the track and that, and then we drowned them. So we sort of had to roll up in the ponchos we had, put a string in contact with each other. But it just wasn't a good setup, and it wasn't a proper setup for an ambush. You had no clear fields of fire, and then you had other troops somewhere out in front of you, your own troops. So it was a real sort of shambles. But yeah, I think we'd sort of got out there too late, and the light closed in on us so quick. So we thought, oh, well, maybe the night will be uneventful, but unfortunately for us, the Vietcong had come in and they got in between us. They were laying the mines in between the two groups. There was my group sort of at the base of this big set of logs they'd knocked down, and then somewhere out to my front, the other 8 or 9 members were, and then the Vietcong were in between us, sort of thing. Anyway, whether the other section heard them or not, but the boss knew they'd got in between us. And he said to his batman, he said, you go and tell the corporal, being myself, he said that the Vietcong are in between us. He said they're out the front in between. And unfortunately, the batman he got up. I'd say he's got disorientated because he's actually walked out. He didn't walk back towards us. He actually walked out towards where the Vietcong were, out towards the other section somewhere. And then he must have realised he was going in the wrong direction. He's turned round and he's come back in. And as he's come back into sort of where he sort of left from, and then he's got to the base of this big mound where I had my machine gun sitting up top. My guy on the machine gun actually got up, whether they got up to change shifts or not, but he actually got up, and this batman challenged him, and I don't think my guy heard him, because the next minute we know there's shots being fired, and the batman actually fired at my guy 5 times with the SLR, the 7.62 round, and you know, when we saw his uniform the next day, it was unbelievable. He'd actually been side on when he was shot at, and he had one round went through the top of his top pocket and went through the back of his shirt and missed his nipple, didn't hit him in the chest. He turned face on, and I think he got 3 rounds through his side pocket, through his wallet and that sort of thing. Then he turned back, and I think the 5th round caught him behind the back of the right knee, and that's sort of what brought him down. That was the shot now. And when you get hit, you know, in the leg with a 7.62, it's pretty ghastly. And that's when we sort of heard the scream, and then sort of all hell broke loose. All I could see was every 4th or 5th round coming in was tracer. So all I could see was rounds coming from out the front coming back in towards us, so I thought we were under attack. So I got the guys to open fire sort of towards the air, because we knew somewhere we had a section out the front there, so we couldn't sort of just cut the front to pieces. I thought, well, maybe if we fired sort of in high in the air, you know, we sort of had some sort of scare tactic, thinking, you know, being the enemy, they might sort of take off. Anyway, we weren't sort of getting anywhere, so I sent up a power illumination flare, lit the place up like daylight, and then sort of here we all are, you know, sort of facing each other, and then we could see where the other section were. Oh, it was a real mess. And then I've got my guy on the mound crying in pain, so in the meantime the Vietcong had took off. They probably thought that was the safest thing to do, so they'd gone. And then we radioed back to base for help, and they said, no, we can't send a helicopter, we're too susceptible of the ground fire at night time, so we're not coming out. We're not sending the armoured personnel carriers out because they're susceptible to fire as well, so you're on your own, you've got to stretcher him back. And I think we're about 8,000 yards out, but in that 8,000 yards we had the torrential downpour, and then we had all these trees that they'd sort of knocked down, so there was no way we were going to carry a stretcher over all that sort of, you know. And the fact, I said to the boss, I'm not standing out here in the bloody dark with a torch cutting stretcher poles, you know. I said, what we'll have to do is take turns and carrying him back on our back. But see, we all had our equipment, we had our backpacks, so we were fully equipped. So we had to not only carry our own, carry his, you know, webbing, backpack and his rifle. So we had to take it in turns, you know, and it was only my section sort of, it was our guy, so we were looking after him. But you had to admire the kid, you know. We took it in turns carrying him back on our back. It took us a couple of hours, and all that time, you know, with such a shocking wound, you know, he never once complained, and it must have been hell being dragged over those bloody stumps and things like that. It must have been horrific, you know, because he was in shock. He had you know, half his leg blown away, and then here we are sort of dragging him over stumps to get him home. And I know I hurt my back doing it, because I spent 2 days lying alongside him in the regimental aid post with back problem, and then after that I had 2 days rest, and then the 4th day I was back on operations. So I know what sort of he felt like, but yeah, that was my first wounded, and a bit of a shock, you know, being shot by our own people. But it was just one of those sort of things. It was an accident. It could have happened to anyone, but it was just a shame, because you know, the batman was certainly upset, and my guy said I didn't see him after that. I never saw him back in the section, so whether, you know, I should imagine he wouldn't have been able to walk normally again anyway. So, but I never got to see him. I never even got to visit him in hospital because I think about a week later I got wounded myself. So that was it. But yeah, that was a bit of a shock. You know.
What were the circumstances that you were wounded in?
It was 5 days short of my 22nd birthday. I remember it quite well actually. The day before we were out on operations, and I tried to jump like a river crossing, and you think, you know, by the time it wasn't a big stream, but it was deep, and you think, you know, you got sort of plenty of spring up to jump and things like that, but you don't realise, you know, because of the weight of your backpack and the equipment you're carrying, it sort of shortens your jumping distance. And I just sort of missed the bank completely and went under, and I wasn't coming up. And the guys with me, you know, they sort of dived in and pulled me out, so they saved my life there. Then, unbeknown to me, I'd picked up a couple of leeches, and they bit me in the side, bit me on the right thigh. And I didn't sort of find them till next morning. By that time it was too late. I had these 2 big, horrific boils, infected boils on my right thigh, but right where my webbing would rub. You know, I was in bloody agony. And then my boss come to me and said, "Oh, look," he said, "we've been in this harbour position for 4 days." He said, "The enemy know we're here now, because we used to set up a position, we'd fan, we'd search everything in that area, and then we'd sort of move on." In other words, we'd cover the areas fairly thoroughly. You know, there was, unless they had a really camouflage bunker system that, you know, we couldn't find. You know, it was, I thought, you know, we were very thorough in what we did. Anyway, so we'd been there for about 4 days, and he said, "Look, they'll know where we are now. So what I want you to do, we want to move on." He said, "I want you to go out and find a new company position." He said, "I want you to find, you know, see if there's some water there, and also an area, you know, for chopper resupply." So I said, "Oh, yeah, all right." And I didn't get time to see the medic, so I said, "Yeah, we'll do that." So I had 9 guys. I had my 8 guys, and I had a signalman. I took a signalman with me, and the area that I sort of headed for, we eventually, by the time we sort of got out there, we were 3 hours out from help. And I'd found this area. We'd walk into to the right was an old rice plantation, old rice paddy, and then to my left there was this big wooded area, big bamboo area. And I said to the guys, "Look, we'll head for the bamboo area." I said, "I don't really want to be standing out here in the open." And so I said, "Make your way there." And then we sort of moved into this bamboo, and as we sort of moved in, there was this big tree. It was about 30 or 40 foot long, and about 5 or 6 feet in diameter. It was massive. It was, you know, must have been 200 years old at least, but it had been cut down and sort of been moved there, and I didn't realise, you know, where the stump was until later on, which was, you know, probably 100 metres down the track. And so we got in, and as we moved in, we found these bowls. There was these china bowls there with fresh bamboo shoots in, a couple of them, you know, and you could see where they'd sort of withered. And I thought, well, you know, there's someone around here. And I said to the guys, I said, "Look, you know, be on the ball." I said, there's fresh food there. And I thought it'd be about 24 hours old because it had gone yellow and withered. And as we sort of passed this big log, you could see the bunker system, big sort of bunker system above ground, you know. And I said to the guys, I said, "Look, stay behind this log." And I said, 2 of you, I said, "I want you to go forward and check out those bunkers, you know." So a couple of them went forward, and they said, "Oh yeah, they're Vietcong bunkers." He said, "But no, they haven't been used in ages, you know." He said, "There's no one been there, you know, there's nothing fresh, nothing." So I said, "Oh, fair enough." So I brought them back on the log and I said, "Look, what I want you to do, I want you to stay behind this log." And I said, "I'll go out with a scout." I said, because there was sort of fresh water running through this area. And I thought maybe it would be a good area for company, you know, because we had fresh water, we had all the bunkers sort of were there, but you know, open area, and then out the front we had a big flat area which you could see for quite some way. And I thought, well, that'd be an ideal area for resupply, you know, and bring in choppers and that. So I thought, yeah, this could be a good place for company. So I said, you stay there, and I'll just go down this tracker, you know, like a little track. It was track that alongside of it was an irrigation ditch, went out to the rice paddies. And it was just it wasn't sort of well used track, but you could see it was a bit of a track, but more of an animal sort of track, I think, because if there was any sort of mine or anything, in the way it sort of, you had your rice husk and you had this sort of like clay, flat clay, you could see if anything being disturbed, it looked like the water had sort of run through it. So it wasn't the sort of thing where, you know, if anyone's going to put a mine in, it'd have to be pretty good. You could sort of see if it had ever been disturbed. So I thought, well, I'll just go along here. And I said to my scout, I said, you follow me. And he was behind me to my left. And I'd gone out, and as I sort of gone out, and as it sort of opened out, to my right was this big tree stump. It'd be about from where this big tree had come from originally. And it'd be, I suppose, the stump would be about 2 foot above ground level where it had been cut off. But it had been done years ago. As I said, it must have been a 200-300-year-old tree because it was massive, you know. And I thought, I'll make my way towards that. But as I was sort of going down, I had my compass, I had my map folded up in front of me in the case, and I had my compass sitting on it, and I was getting my sort of grid bearings and map reference, so I knew exactly, you know, where I was then, to sort of thing. I said, yeah, well, I'll mark it on here so I know, tell company where we are. And I made my way over, or heading towards this big tree stump, and sort of as I was walking, I was sort of watching my compass and you know, checking it on the map, and then I had my rifle, I had my M16 in the crook of my arm. I sort of had it there, and I just had my finger running along the outside of the trigger. And as I sort of went over towards this big stump, and that I saw sort of movement out the sort of the right of my eye, and all of a sudden the ground next to the stump moved, and out. The first thing I saw was the coolie hat come out, and everything sort of happened so fast. I saw the coolie hat, I saw the face, I saw the black pyjamas sort of thing. Then I saw like a perforated barrel. It was with a round casing in underneath. It was a little Russian burp gun, I realised later on. They call a Russian burp gun, but I remember that. And then he sort of kept coming up out of this hole, and as he come up, I could see and hear the sound, and then I thought, as it was happening, I brought my rifle forward, thinking that, yeah, you know, I've got sort of equal opportunity to, you know, fire. We were sort of firing at each other, but he'd actually fired first. But what had happened was, when I'd got my rifle forward and then pulled the trigger, I was actually, he hit me twice. The rounds hit me twice, and I was actually sent back about 6 foot. I was on my back when I actually pulled the trigger. But what had happened was the M60, I was carrying 200 rounds for the machine gun, because I took the 2 machine guns out on that patrol, and I had the bandoliers crossed over, and I don't know whether the first or second round or how many he fired, but he hit me twice. One of the rounds hit where I didn't know until later on, where the belt was crossed over, because they were actually blown away. They blew later on when I sort of looked down, they were gone, and half my shirt was gone. It blew the shirt off, sort of cut half my shirt off. And the other one caught me through the side, opened me up through the side. But I didn't know at the time, I didn't even know I'd been hit. All I thought that, yeah, I'm facing, I've pulled the trigger, but when I pulled the trigger, I was on my back. And I only got a couple of rounds out, and they'd actually been on that angle. One of the shell casings had actually come out and jammed, so I'd only fired the 2 shots, and my rifle was jammed because I was on my back, and the casing was caught in the extraction thing. So, but and then all sort of hell broke loose. You know, there was firing coming from everywhere then, and instead of the kid staying around, it was only a young fella, instead of him staying around to finish the job, he sort of took off, and then my scout, he'd gone down, he'd rolled over the road, he went down into the ditch alongside the road, which was good cover for him, because said we're out in the open. And then I made my way over to the log. I sort of got him behind the log, and then I said I still didn't know I'd been hit. And then my left foot, my left leg had gone cold, and my boot, like my foot had gone cold in my boot. And I looked down to see what had happened, why I was sort of so cold. And then when I looked down, that's when I realised, the rounds had gone, my shirt had gone, half my webbing had gone, and then the hole, the one that hit me in the side, had opened me up, and then my intestines were sort of hanging out. And then once I saw it, that's when it hurt. Oh God, it hurt. I was in agony, and then I'm trying to sort things out in between the tears, because oh God, it hurt. And then I thought, well, I've got to get a field dressing on it, and I ended up putting a couple of field dressing on, because I bleed at the best of time, and oh, was I bleeding. So I got some field dressings on it, and then I wanted to get back from there back to my section, and then every time I sort of went away from the stump, or sort of tried to get away from the stump, someone was taking shots at me. So eventually, once I sort of got the field dressings on, I rolled from the log, rolled across the road and went down into the ditch, and then crawled my way back along and met my forward scout face to face in the ditch. And I got him turned round, and then we sort of crawled back to the log. And by that time, sort of all hell had broken loose. And then when I got back onto company, I said, look, this is where I am. Can you send, backup? And they said, look, we've got no aircraft available at the moment. We've got to send in guys to help you on foot. And I said, look, I'm 3 hours out. I said, I'm being hit, I'm bleeding, and I said, there's no way in the world we're going to last 3 hours. And I said, every time we try to get away from this log, someone's taken a shot at us. So the only other help we had was our artillery. So what we did, we sort of got our markers down, got our artillery in, and started walking our own artillery in. So eventually we brought our own rounds in on top of our position, and called out under our own artillery. And I remember I got halfway back, run into the backup section, and they said when they sort of went in, left the artillery, they were still there apparently. But they'd found some food and didn't find any bodies, so I don't think we killed anyone. But they found some ammunition and blood and that, so we drew blood somewhere. And then I got back to, I remember walking back to the company, and my company sergeant major coming out, and he said, Easterby, he said, you're lucky, he said, you should buy a lotto ticket. And I said, yeah, lotto ticket in Vietnam, yeah. I said, yeah, that'd be right. So, and that's about all I remember, because I think I lost so much blood, I just passed out then. And next thing I know, I woke up in Bung Tau Hospital 2 days later, and I'd spent 11 days there. And then when I'd sort of come out of there, they said, look, you're virtually no good to us anymore. We can't, your wound's going to take too long to heal. So, you're going home.
What kind of treatment did you get while you were hospitalised in Bung Tau?
Excellent. Yeah, it was fabulous. And and even I think what impressed me so much too, not only with the medical staff and that, was the Red Cross. And I've always had a sort of soft spot for the Red Cross and the Salvation Army, because every sort of where we went over there, or even in Borneo, the Salvo man was always out the front with a hot urn. Doesn't matter where you were, and that was absolutely fabulous. And you don't know what it's like in the field, in the troops in the field, with someone to drop in, out the point with a hot cup of Milo, or tea or coffee. That's just unbelievable. So I've always had a sort of soft spot for that, and the Red Cross were excellent. They got me new clothing, got me writing gear so I could sort of write home. Got the correct information home to my wife, because they had me down as a South Australian soldier, and but you know, I had no sort of address in South Australia. So the Army sort of got a few things wrong. But the Red Cross got the information to my wife correctly, that I was okay. And then the fact that when I was told I was being, you know, sent home, they got that sort of right, you know, the time I'd be home and that. So that was very good. And I said I've got a great respect for the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, things like that. They were great thing, and they really sort of stood out in hospitals and you know, just the uplift of the guys in the field and back at base and that. You know, these are the guys that just don't get the recognition, I think. But yeah, it was good. And the medical staff, even though, you know, I had, I think, a New Zealand nurse, I think Sister Black, hard taskmaster, but great nurse. But yeah, very, very good, top service.
What sort of treatment were you given while you were there?
Well, the wound was pretty rugged, so I was bag stitched, sort of thing, but keen. But yeah, it was, you know, they couldn't sort of do enough for you in hospital, and so I spent 11 days there, and saw a lot of people sort of come and go alongside me.
What was the daily routine of hospital?
Well, it was mainly, once you sort of could move about, you had to go and, you know, you could shower and do your sort of own thing, but there was no pressure put on you for anything. You just, you know, you got your change in clothing, and I think you had to have the bed made by a certain time, and you could sort of sit on top of it. But you know, you had the library sort of bought books around and things like that. So yeah, it was a general sort of, you know, it was a good sort of break. And I didn't expect to spend 11 days there, but I also didn't expect either that I'd be sent home after that. I was a bit disappointed. Disappointed? I don't know if disappointed would be the right word, but I regret being sent home from it. I was there. I'd only done 8 months, and I wanted to finish. I wanted to finish what I started, and I went over with a great group of guys, and I wanted to remain with them and get them all home, hopefully. But that didn't eventuate, unfortunately. And something I'll live with for the rest of my life, not finishing my tour. So yeah, I didn't think I'd done enough, and I let a lot of people down. So,
in what way do you think you let them down?
Oh, just the fact that, you know, I didn't finish what I started. You know, I went over. The whole idea was to go over with a group of guys and get them all home safely. You know, and it didn't eventuate, unfortunately. But
do you think that you could be forgiven for coming home because of the wounds that you received?
No, not really. No, I think I should have stayed and finished the job. I'll regret that all my life, I think.
Did members of your platoon not come home?
Yeah, little Bluey Maguire. He was about a week short of coming home. Was killed.
What happened to little Bluey Maguire?
Oh, I think he was hit by a mine. I think. It was just, you know, he was just such a nice kid, little red head and glasses, and unbelievable.
Do you really think it could have made a difference if you were still there, Commander?
Oh, I think so. Especially when he only had a short time to go.
What gives you that?
Oh, I just think probably maybe I'd have put him in the right position. I don't know. It's just hard to say when you're not there, but I was hoping to get them all home. But it was just bad enough getting people wounded, not alone getting them killed. So yeah, I regret that. But once I sort of got out of hospital that day, I was sort of no use to them anymore.
How did they explain that you're no use?
Oh, the fact is I'd be too long out of the bush. You know, they needed people in the bush. They couldn't afford to let me sit back at base, which I wouldn't have done anyway. I wouldn't have sat back and watched the other guys do my work. So they decided to send me home. But that was sort of disappointing too, because they sent us home in civilian clothing, civilian aircraft. and like through a back door sort of thing, you know. And that was a bit disheartening. And you come sort of straight out of the jungle, you know, and they put you back into Civvy Street, and that's, you could see why people didn't adjust and couldn't adjust.
How did you manage?
Well, I didn't. I had 8 days break when I come home before I was being sent up to Canungra as an instructor. And I went to pieces in a bowling alley. The sounds of the bowling balls, I think. But I'd actually sort of had a nervous breakdown.
Can you describe what happened during that incident?
I just couldn't cope, you know. It's I just couldn't handle normal everyday things, and it never, you know, it sort of everything got on top of me after that.
Who were you at the bowling alley with?
My wife and that. And then from then on, it just, things seemed to deteriorate. And then when I got sent up to Canungra, I said, we're
what
up
happened
there.
at the bowling alley before you left, Tony?
Well, I went to the floor, and then I had trouble getting up. I had trouble sort of leaving the place. I was in some sort of shock for some reason or other. I don't know what it was. I've never really found out, but it wasn't good, whatever it was. And then...
how did your wife manage in that situation?
Well, she didn't know what was going on. And as I said, they brought us straight out of the jungle, you know, and back into civilian life, and you were supposed to sort of cope, you know, straight away. You was sort of like switch off, you know, you're back home in Australia now. And unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. You know, there was no such thing as counselling. There's, if there was anything known of post-traumatic stress or anything like that no one was admitting to it, or whether they didn't know about it, I don't know. But it certainly, I think from that time on I had some problems, and I knew I had some problems, but the service didn't seem to know what it was either. You know, they sent me to different, you know, they sent me on psychiatric assessments and things like that, but it, I don't know. By that time I'd sort of been on active service 3 times, but...
How did you and your wife react to the incident in the bowling alley?
Well, she didn't.
Break?
Yeah, she didn't know. She didn't know what was wrong. I knew there was something wrong, but I, you know, I couldn't say. I didn't know. I didn't know why I was reacting the way I was, but something triggered it. Whether it was the noise or something triggered something, you know, within that put the fear of God into me.
What state were you in during the remainder of your leave?
Not real good. And then when I sort of went to Canungra, I was being sent up there as an instructor, and then once I sort of went back into uniform and then started wearing the backpacks, the weight on my back, I started having problems with the weight pushing down my spine. So I knew sometime I'd injured that. So thank God it was recorded. Thank God the Army recorded it. But and then I think I stuck it out for about 6 months. I think I pulled about 6 months short of my 6 years. But I couldn't sort of handle it after that. I didn't know what I wanted to do, where I was going. And then I had the offer to work my ex-father-in-law's farm. And I decided...
How long were you at Canungra?
About 6 months after I'd come back. But I wasn't getting home because, again, you know, had the bushfires. I think the courses went for about 6 weeks to put the guys through, you know, training guys to go to Vietnam. So they were long courses, and they were every sort of feature of it. You know, weapon training, grenade training, tactical training, all that sort of stuff. So they're fairly comprehensive, and you had to prepare for them, you know, because you had to run the whole show, sort of thing, for a particular group of people. So it was very demanding, and that was sort of, I don't know whether I thought it was a letdown, I don't know, but I wasn't sort of coping real well with it. And then I was sort of stuck it out for about 6 months, and then I couldn't take any more. And then I took the offer of working the farm, and then the service said, well, yeah, okay, we don't have a problem with that, and I got my discharge. And but I still wasn't well when I started on the farm, because I ended up paying my own medical bills in the end, and the army paid some of the rehabilitation, because by that time I was being seen by the psychiatric department in Adelaide, and then I was put in with drug addicts and alcoholics, and something I wasn't sort of suffering with. And then I had a fallout with that group, because they had what they call group therapy, and then they'd say to me that I wasn't sort of participating, and I said, well, look, I really got nothing in common. I said, I'm not onto drugs and I'm not alcoholic. And then, you know, when they'd found out I'd been to Vietnam, it was especially the hippies with their drug habits and that, they called me a baby killer. And that's when I decided I'd had enough. So I ended up beating the hell out of about 4 of them. And at one stage there, I think they were going to have me for assault, but I think what had happened was the fact that it was supposed to be a controlled session, and it wasn't controlled, sort of thing. So they didn't have much of a ground to stand on, I think. But after I'd sort of taken my anger out on 4 of them, I decided I wasn't coming back, and I wasn't invited back. So
who arrested the situation when you decided to beat the hell out of them?
Oh, I was just in the group there. By that time, I'd really had enough, and then, you know, being spat at and all that sort of thing after I'd come home, because I wasn't going to wear my uniform out like I used to, and you know, Vietnam was sort of a dirty word, sort of those things. It was a bit of a shock to come home to that.
What was the reaction from the other group members when you decided to beat the hell out of a couple of these hippies?
Oh, they just sort of sat back and watched, you know, but I said they deserve everything they got. And but I think it too was just a lot of anger, a lot of frustration too, but they didn't come back for seconds. So. But
what happened in the aftermath?
Well, as I said, I never went back. I wasn't invited back, and I never went back. And I think the 2 years, by that time I'd put notes together for, well, I didn't know it was going to be a book then, but I'd sort of put notes together for short stories, so that was an outlet. And then the fact that I spent 2 years just driving a tractor around 3 sort of share farms, I think that was the sort of saving grace, because I was by myself for virtually 2 years, just sort of, you know, out in the open. And
what had happened to your marriage?
It was sort of surviving. By that time you know, my wife was happy being on the farm, being a farm girl, but, you know, it wasn't sort of getting any better. You know, by the time I sort of left there after 2 years, I moved back to Brisbane with the 2 children, and my wife sort of stayed there for a while and then joined me later on. But
did the problems that you were having lead to any conflict in your relationship?
Oh yeah, I think eventually it deteriorated. I think it finished it in the end. It was just, you know, things just got worse year after year after year. So, but I sort of, you know, I don't know where the problem was. I think we were sort of both to blame in a lot of respects. She didn't understand. I couldn't think I could make her understand what I was going through, and I didn't know really what I was going through. But in the end, she just found someone else. So the only bad thing I think all that was the fact that I didn't have the close contact with my children. Outside of that, you know, she found someone else she was happy with, so that was fine. So I don't sort of begrudge her that.
So what happened when you went back to Brisbane with 2 kids?
I went back to spray painting then. I got a job locally doing some spray painting, and then my wife eventually came up from the farm and joined me. I think I probably did the painting for about 7 or 8 months, and then I decided I'd go back in the service.
What made you come to this decision?
Well, I enjoyed the service life, and I miss the sort of the service environment, and and there was, I had a great life in the army. I had a great life in the service, and I sort of missed that. And I certainly wasn't going to be a farmer, and I didn't really want to be a spray painter for the rest of my life. So, and then I saw how the military police operated in Vietnam, and I thought, gee, if I ever go in the service, that's what I'd like to do. And I applied for the Air Force, the Air Force Police, and then I went and did my medical. I declared, which was unusual for any sort of service, I declared the fact that I was having some problems with my back, and I declared the fact that I'd been under psychiatric treatment. And but they sort of checked all my records and said, yeah, that's not a problem. So I went back to Adelaide. I'd been out too long, so I had to go back through recruit training. And so I went to Adelaide in Edinburgh, RAF base, to do my recruit training for the RAF. And then I think that was about 13 weeks for that. And then
was that difficult with the kinds of injuries?
No. I sort of wasn't having any. I wasn't sort of having any physical problems at that stage. The medical sort, I wasn't having any treatment for it, so I sort of was living with that. But no, I found that was quite good. A lot of the stuff they were training on I'd already done. They still had the old SLR rifle. So yeah, I found that quite good. It was just the theory side of learning different things theory-wise. So yeah, it was back to sort of competition. I sort of kept up with the young kids. They sort of had me over a barrel with the education-wise, but that was about all. I could sort of keep up with them as far as any other training. In fact, I was ahead of them with weaponry and things like that. So I had all that down pretty pat. So yeah, and the physical side of it, I got through all right. I was passing all the tests and that. So yeah, I sort of went through Edinburgh, fairly easy. Sort of, and then I had to, from there, I was given the opportunity to be sent out and wait for my position on the basic police course in Melbourne at RAF Base Point Cook. So I was there for about 2 or 3 months before I started the basic course, and one of the corporals there, who actually became a commissioned officer in the pro officer, he was really good, like I did on the job training, and he used to set me an exam. He'd do it up over the weekend for me, and every Monday morning I'd have this little exam to do. So by the time I started the basic police course, it was certainly a boost for me. So,
what sort of things are contained within the basic police course?
The same as outside, powers of arrest, military law, a lot of training on, what to do at traffic accidents, or how to search a room thoroughly, how to search people thoroughly, interviews, how to conduct interviews, how to collect evidence, because you had a sort of forensic side of it. So yeah, very, very interesting. And when you sort of realise the service looks after its own, the only time you actually work, like with the civil police, is mainly sort of a murder or something like that. And if you're up in places like Malaysia, you do it all yourself. You do the whole thing. But back in Australia, the only sort of time that you work in liaison with civil police is normally a murder or something like that, or a very, very serious crime. But other than that, the service looks after its own.
So if there's crime within the service, is that what you mean?
It's mainly looked after by the RAF police, yeah. And
Well, what sort of crime can happen within the...
well, it's surprising. The service is like it's like a big factory. I looked at it as a big factory, and the army would have been the same, and I should imagine the navy's the same. But you don't sort of realise what goes on, and like, you know, the average serviceman doesn't have that sort of interest what goes on. But when you're actually involved in police matters, policing, so it's quite a lot, and you think, well, you know, the service is like a big factory, and you'd have the same problems in the service as you would inside it, like a big factory. You know, like there's petty theft. There's always something sort of going missing, and you know, your job is to find out you know, who took it, and especially if it's valuable stuff. You know, if it's military equipment, it might be stuff belonging to aircraft, or might be personal items. So you have that power, and you're dealing with people's careers too, you know, which is a big thing. It is stressful. I found it very stressful, but it is very rewarding too.
What's the rewarding side?
Well, I think the fact that you know, you can be presented with a like a crime or crime scene, and then resolve it. I think in the time, the 16 years that I had, there was very few investigations that I didn't get sort of a satisfaction from, which was pretty good. One of the major ones was a murder of my CO's wife, which has never been resolved. But that was one of the very few that I never got to sort of resolve. But the fact is, I was away that day. I'd been promoted to sergeant the night or the week before, and I was at a dining in function, and I thought, well, I'm not going to be real good the next day, so I decided I'd go fishing with a policeman mate of mine. So I was down at the Port Lonsdale fishing when the murder was committed, sort of thing. And but by the time I'd sort of got back to base the following day, they'd started initially investigating, but there was a lot of mistakes made there too. So
the crime scene was corrupted.
The crime scene was damaged and things like that. So yeah, so that we worked on that a long time. Interviewed a lot of people, and it just, you know, we never really resolved that one. It was one of the very few, but most of the time I had a very successful rate in 16 years. And one stage there, when I worked with a chap called Kai Ching Young, which he was an ex-Hong Kong police officer. He, I think when we worked at the Stores Depot, we had, between the two of us, we had the second best success investigation rate in Australia.
Gee. For
the two of us. So that was pretty good, you know, and that was up against a detachment, you know, the amount of work comes through a detachment. But two of us were, you know, and he was unbelievable. He was a really good investigator, you know. He'd a lot of experience and, you know, very, very good.
So there was just two of you?
Yeah, at that stage, a corporal and myself, yeah.
You'd want to get on with the other person?
Oh, yeah, but, you know, the way, in the early days, there wasn't sort of, it wasn't split. You didn't have a security patrol, investigation patrol, where all police were all investigators, sort of thing. But the training was good, and the people that sort of trained us were, well, this corporal who eventually became an officer. He actually wrote the rules of evidence for the British constabulary, you know, law constabulary, because he was a policeman in England. So he was, you know, that was the sort of training we had, people like that. And then also we were put on different police courses, proper police courses. You know, I did.
So training with civilian police.
Yeah, I was sent on a Commonwealth police course in Canberra. Every time they sent me to Canberra, it was in the middle of winter, freezing. So I did a Commonwealth police course in Canberra. Then I went back, when it became federal police, I went back and did the federal police traffic accident course. But these are courses for senior people, you know, where you would command, say, 60 personnel. so they were quite good courses. And I did detective training school. So yeah, they, and then I went back to night school because I wanted a commission, and I had to have tertiary education for a commission. So I spent 4 years on night school in between working shift. So I went back and I did my certificate in police studies. That took 2 years night school. But before that I went back and did my intermediate and then I did that over night time, went to school over night time. Then the final exams I had to sit with the kids during the day, and do my thing. So I did that, got through that.
How did you feel about that?
Oh, it didn't worry me, but I'd put the work in during the year, and but I'd got the education which I didn't have, and then I went back and got my tertiary, and I got the subjects for a commission. So, but when they told me it was going to add 2 years to my service, I was 41 then. I said no. I said I'm not staying. I'm not coming back. But that was the only reason I didn't take the commission. But in the meantime, I went back to Malaysia. They sent me back to Malaysia.
So this is after you've graduated and you've done all your stuff?
Well, I spent 10 years in Melbourne. I sort of never got out of Melbourne. I went from Point Cook, which was the home of the Air Force. I was there for a while, and then they posted me to Laverton, which was just down the road, Laverton Air Base. Then I was there for about 4 years, and that was, they had a school of signals sort of was there, so there was a lot of work there. We had one of our magazines broken into, and with plastic explosive all stolen. We thought it was a terrorist, but it turned out to be some of the cadets had broken into it. And so yeah, we had plenty of work there, and I can't think of any major crime, but we had the police station just down the road, so we sort of worked in the Asian with them as well. But yeah, there was some interesting work there for 4 years, and I had a hard task sergeant there. Like within a week, he said within a week you've got to know every street on the base. He said, and he said you've got to know, he said I'll take you around and I'll ask you questions and you've got to know them, sort of thing. So you had to go around, you had to learn your base, you had to know everything about your base, where the sort of flaws were and things like that, where the weak spots were and things like that. So yeah, he was a hard taskmaster, but it sort of kept you on your toes. So that was good. I had 4 years there. Then I got sent to one stores depot, which sort of doesn't exist anymore, but still in Melbourne, just outside Footscray. So I had about over 2 years there, and I was promoted there. I was promoted to sergeant, but I had some good work there too, with gear sort of missing from the stores depot and different sort of things. Then I went from there back to Point Cook. I was in charge of Point Cook for about 4 years, and that was quite good. There was some good work there. We had some serious crime there at one stage, and also being the Port Phillip Bay and that, any of the bodies, anyone sort of drown or anything like that, the way the currents go tend to wash everyone up on Point Cook Beach. So there was quite a bit to do, with body searches and things along the beach at times and that. So that was quite interesting. And we had some serious rapes and things like that there, which was had to be investigated and things like that. So yeah, there's some good work there. I had a good group. I had a good group of policemen that worked there. And then from there, because I applied for my commission, they said, look, you've got to do detachment. In other words, you've got to work in a detachment, like a city operation group. And they said, without that, you'd be struggling to get a commission in the provost side of it. So you've got to work in a detachment, for a period of time. So I got sent to Grattan Street in Carlton in the detachment there, and I worked there for about 12 months, and that was good because it had all facets. Because your field security, which is your sort of cloak and dagger, you sort of where you sort of fit in with your Air Force sort of group after hours, and you know, especially if there's drug problems and that. And then I worked 2 years in the drug squad there, you know. So that was sort of all round sort of training. That was good. And then I did lecturing. I did lecturing in drugs. So I really enjoyed my time in the drug side of it.
Was there any sort of problem with drugs in the forces?
No, not at that stage. Not in the early stages. I don't know what it's like now, but it wasn't a big thing in the service. And it wasn't a big thing in the army either, because in the army we were on Operation 7. We were issued with a capsule of morphine each, in case we were wounded. You know, you give yourself morphine, and if anything would have been abused, it would have been that, because you had a capsule and a needle and that. But you know, that was always, you know, no one was ever sort of running out of it and then asking for more. So, if it was going to be abused, Vietnam would have been the place to do it and things like that. So that was never done. So that wasn't a problem with our people, and I never saw it, not in the army, and I didn't see it much in the Air Force. We had the odd, you know, the young servicemen, you know, offered LSD and things like that, you know, which we sort of tracked down to different outside groups. And then we had sort of, we put people into groups that were, you know, sort of anti-base sort of thing, where they'd want to come out and sort of cause trouble at a base, like might be one of our top secret or communication bases. They'd want to get out there and create trouble. So,
like a whole lot of protesters at Pine Gap.
And that. So we'd have sort of people on the inside, so we know, what base they were particularly interested in and when they would do it and things like that. So yeah, all that was sort of, but a lot of that was the younger, you know. By that time I was too old for all that, but a lot of the time was the younger operator, the young policeman, where you could sort of keep him away from the base and then sort of slot him into a group like that, and
put him undercover.
Yeah, when the time comes. So all that was part and parcel, you know. And then you each time you did a different course, they'd send you off to the morgue again. So you'd have to go through the morgue each time, because when you went up to places like Malaysia and that, you had to be present for the autopsy. The autopsies were done up there, and it was only done on the servicemen, and any of the women be sent home back to Australia. But they were pretty sort of, you know, rugged up there. They didn't have the, you know, facilities up there that we have here. You know, your morgue there was just a building with a slab and the hose on the floor and a hole in the wall, and then they didn't even take your clothes off, you know, to do the test on you, and then the tests weren't that good. So yeah, their autopsies a little much to be desired, but you had to be present for them because they were service people. So yeah, you had to be prepared for things like that. And then there was, I think I probably attended 5 or 6 suicides, I think, while I was in the service. So, you know, people either hung themselves or gassed themselves or sort of choked on when they were sniffing pure and simple in a plastic bag, sort of thing. Yeah, so. You know, you had to be prepared for that sort of thing, because it does live with you all your life, especially, you know, people that you sort of know, and they've hung themselves and things like that. So yeah, it was quite interesting work.
At what point did you go to Malaya?
I went up to Malaysia in '81. I got posted. I got posted from the detachment to they decided they're going to close the detachments down, and then they were sending people out to different areas, and they were having some problems in Adelaide at the Elizabeth, the Air Force base at Edinburgh, and I was sent there with a group. By that time they'd split the mustering. They had a mobile section that sort of checked security, and then they had the investigators. And even though I was an investigator, I was put down on a security sort of side of it, and because I didn't sort of get on with the boss running the show, so I was sort of sent to security for 12 months, and then I had the application to a posting to Malaysia, and that came up while I was there. I had 12 months, and by that time my wife Joy, she had a job with Telecom.
This is your second wife?
Yeah, my second wife, and she had a job with Telecom there, so she was working there, and then you know, once the sort of posting come up, you know, she had to stop working because she can't work in Malaysia. So we went up to Malaysia in '81. It was for a 2-year posting, but because they were bringing the squadrons home, there was 3 squadrons when I went up there, and they decided we were pulling out. And the first year we were there, they took 2 squadrons home. We had 40 RAF police up there at one stage, and they decided, yeah, we're sort of not, you know, replacing people up, and they asked us would we want to do 6 months extensions. So I said, yeah, you know, that was good. My wife was playing A-grade sports, and you know, we were earning good money. It was a good start because we hadn't been married that long, and so yeah, so we jumped it. So we ended up getting 12 months extension. So we did 3 years up there. We come back in '84.
Well, that would have been interesting going back to Malay.
Yeah, I had the 16-year gap. It was totally different in how I saw it up there, because they were still, by that time they were really anti-British, you know, very anti-British, and we, you know, we weren't sort of treated as we were in the 60s. It was completely sort of, you know, there was, well, I can't say respect, you know, you can't say to people, yeah, well, you know, we're in your country, we respect the sort of thing. It doesn't happen. But there, you know, there was a certain amount when we went up there the first time, especially the elderly people and that, you know, they still sort of had a British sort of colonial sort of upbringing and things like that. And then it sort of got to the, when we went back the second time, it got to the younger generation, you know, knew nothing about, you know, I think to them British rule was an occupation force or something like that. But it's certainly a different atmosphere when we went back that time. But even though we were there to be ambassadors, you know, for our country, because the idea, we attended a lot of traffic accidents. I think on an 8-hour shift, I would probably do 2 or 3 break and enters of our RAF quarters or something like that. I'd probably do 1 or 2 traffic accidents involving our families, you know, and the idea was to get there and resolve the matter and peacefully as best as you can, because if, you know, if someone was injured and that, you got them to hospital, you know, we got them to our own hospital if they're our people or that, but we always got our ambulance there first, and we always got the local people, because you know, we got them to their hospital very quickly, because it was nothing to wait up to 3 hours for the police to arrive, if they arrived at all. It was nothing to wait 3 hours for an ambulance, and then when it finally got there, there's nothing in them. You know, there's an old canvas stretcher, but there's no first aid gear or oxygen or anything like that.
Okay.
And then, depending on the crew, if it's a Malaysian crew and the guys are Chinese, they won't pick him up if he can't get up and get in the thing, he doesn't go. So you have this racial thing amongst themselves, and they seem to think that, you know, the Europeans are racist. You haven't seen racist until you've lived in the country. Very racial amongst themselves. And many a time I would go out and get people. I remember one there, I cut a Chinese guy. He'd come off his motorbike midnight the night before, and 6 o'clock in the morning he was still tangled up in the barbed wire on the side of the road, and and we saw him as we drove. Was finishing shift about 6. We saw him as we drove past, and he just couldn't get out. He had it round his throat and everywhere. And there was a group of Malay shadow boxing, or doing their morning thing alongside of him, you know. And I said to him, I said, "Do they know you?" He said, "Yeah." And I said, "Why didn't they get you out?" He said, "Oh no," he said, "they're Malay." He said, "I'm Chinese," you know. But he'd been there for, you know, over 6 hours. We had to cut him out and things like that. But yeah, and some of the traffic accidents I went to, you know, they wouldn't sort of pick each other up. You know, they're unreal in that respect. But, you know, they've lived that way all their lives. So
Certainly an eye-opener.
yeah, so, you know, we sort of, you know, can't say anything. We were ambassadors, you know, for our country, but our job was to, you know, get our ambulance there and get first aid and get these people. But it wasn't unusual that I'd take people to hospital and they die in the corridor on me, you know, because I I remember one chap there we used to call Captain Pyjamas, and the reason we call him that, I think he had a mental problem, because he used to wear these thick flannelette pyjamas, these striped pyjamas, and he'd walk around in the middle of Malaysia in the heat, and then he'd just go into your house and collect bottles, you know, and you'd have guard dogs and all that, and you know, the dogs would be hanging off the side of him, tearing him to pieces, but he still got his bottles. And I went out to, this morning, he'd actually been walking up the middle of the road, and one of our servicemen riding to work on his push bike. And as he's sort of coming down the road, old Captain's walking towards him, and as he got close, Captain sidestepping, and they ended up colliding in the middle of the road. And then I got called, and I went out there, and Captain's there, you know, sitting up holding his knee, you know, telling me he's hurt his knee. So I got the ambulance, put him in, sent him to Penang Hospital, their hospital, and never thought much about it. And the next day, when I started shift again, I got a call saying that his relatives had contacted service and want donations, wanted sort of a payment, because Captain had died. And I said, what do you mean? Yeah, he died. And they said, oh, he died of a skull fracture, you know. And I said, well, you know what I said to him, he was holding his knee, but what they did, we took him in, we put him there, and they left him in the corridor. And I don't know how many hours they left him there, but he died in the corridor. And that wasn't the first time they'd taken someone in and they died in there. So, yeah, so that was a sort of an eye-opener. And then I had one of our own school teachers. He'd been attacked at the ferry and put into a coma by the locals. And I'd heard he was in the hospital, so I went to collect him. And I went to Penang Hospital, and he's lying in the corridor and then on stretcher. And I said to the medical staff, I said, have you given him any sort of medication? I said, have you been given anything, you know? And they said, oh no, he hasn't asked for anything. And I said, it was a bit hard when he's in a coma, and that's what he was. He wasn't coming out. So I contacted the base, and they said, look, it sounds pretty bad. I said, what we suggest you do is, I was working by myself at that stage, and they said, we suggest you put him in the back of the station wagon, and we'll meet you halfway where we can with the RAF ambulance. And just that actually saved his life, saved him brain damage. So, you know, that was real good. I was very pleased with that.
That's a really important job that you had there, Ab.
Yeah, and it was good. And he also later on, you know, when he sort of got over it, he came to. He said, I'm you know, very, very pleased that you did what you did, because, and when they sort of, you know, medically, he was getting to the stage he could have been permanently brain damaged. So he was quite helpful. But yeah, we did a lot for the families up there. I think my wife was one of the very few that never had a traffic accident. I had 13 in the first year. I was a fair bugger. I had no patience, you know, when it come to overtaking. You know, they'd overtake, you know, when there was a truck coming, and when it was clear, they wouldn't overtake. So, you know, unreal. But yeah, so that was the thing. But in an 8-hour operation, it said it wasn't unusual to do, you know, the 2 or 3 sort of involvement with the locals, and then 1 or 2 with your own traffic sort of thing. And the idea was everything was sort of coffee money up there. You know, money was more important than sort of if anyone was really hurt or injured. They have this thing, you know, money sort of solves everything. But the idea was to get there and you do the negotiating for the RAF family. But yeah, it was a really good job. Even, you know, even the car was broken down, you get there and you wouldn't leave the wife stranded or anything like that. So yeah, it was all liaison. It was you know, ambassadors through our country, and it worked very, very well.
Was that your last posting?
No, I'd come back from there. In actual fact, I wanted to go back to Brisbane, because I wanted to look for a job. I knew I was getting out within the next couple of years, and then I wanted to look for a job. And so I had my posting to go back to Brisbane. And normally you sort of got, if there was vacancies, you got your posting. But I think somewhere along the line I upset the Provost Marshal, and I ended up in Western Australia here. And I'd never had it on my posting, and anyone that, you know, people were killing each other to get over here, and the guys that were here didn't want to leave. So yeah, it was a bit of a shock to come here. And then I said to him, I said, look, is there a promotion posting? And they said, oh no, there's no vacancy for flight sergeant here. And I said, well, I believe I'm due, like I had a bit of problem with the officer in Adelaide, that was going to do my assessment for commission. So the fallout I had with him, I'd say he cost me promotion. He cost me 2 or 3 years promotion, because I just didn't agree with what he was doing, and we just didn't get on. So he sort of had a big input into my assessment while I was there, and that cost me dearly, and cost me a lot of money when you sort of look back over it. So yeah, I was a little bit behind time, but by that time I knew I was, by the assessments I got in Malaysia and all that, I knew that I was due for promotion. And so when they said I was posted here, and then I said, well, is it a promotion post? And no. And I said, look, I believe I'm due to be promoted within at least the next 3 or 6 months. And I said, it means I'll shift all my stuff from Malaysia, because I had all my teak furniture made and everything. And I'd already had a house full of furniture in Adelaide in storage. And I said, yeah, I could get over here. And I said, be here less than 6 months, and then I'm posted again. And they said, oh, that's right. And I said, by that time I'm under 2 years. I said, I've got less than 18 months to do with my service. I said, does that mean that the service will shift my furniture again? They said, oh no, not under 2 years. And I thought, well, this is a bit unfair. I said, you're telling me that I'm going to be shifted in 6 months anyway. And then the fact that because I've got less time to serve, wherever I get sent next, I'm sort of on my own if I don't sign on. So I thought, yeah, that's a bit rich. So, and then when we got it, we fell in love with the place, and all our children had grown up. So we thought, oh, and then when I sort of went to Pierce, I was stationed up at Pierce here, and the guys I was working with there said, look, I like the place, and a lot of them have been here for a long time. And they said, I said, I don't know here. I said, but I'd like to look for a house. And they said, oh, we will live in Edgewater. I said, where the hell's Edgewater? And they said, oh, about 40 k's through the pine plantation. And there was about 8 of them living here at that stage. And they said, oh, it's the first satellite city. Here, everything underground. It's a lovely area. So I come and had a look, and we actually bought the house to fit the furniture. So yeah, we loved it. And then not long after, I'd got posted into Williamtown. I'd got my crown and sent that to myself and a sergeant in charge of the investigation in Williamtown. And so I said to my wife, I said, look, she had a job and we had a little dog and that. And I said, oh, you stay here, I'll go and live in for 18 months. So I went over and lived in for 18 months. But there was some good work over there as well. I had a fairly big court-martial before I left. But by that time, they'd brought in the tri-service law. So it was Army, Navy, Air Force, one law for all. But with that law, the serviceman has the same rights within the service as he has outside. So if you want to bring in a private lawyer to argue for it, and we're up against private lawyers. So, and the training we had was, we'd always been used to, people being from within the service, and then you're up against professional lawyers. The job gets awfully difficult. And then when you've got people's careers in court-martialed, and you've got top QCs and all this sort of thing, yeah, it makes the job very difficult, because they make it really hard for you in the witness box.
I'll bet.
But, but I went up against people like Gal Valley and those, yeah, and we did all right. So, yeah, I ended my RAF service in 86, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, and then I had the opportunity to buy my army service back. So I did 22 years in the military all up, and don't regret a day.
So what do you usually do for Anzac Day?
I hadn't much. I think the way we were treated after we come back from Vietnam sort of put me off a little bit, and I didn't mix. I didn't even mix with the guys that I'd served with. I was about 34 years really before I began to sort of join the groups and sort of mix. Even though was in the Air Force, now I never, if I went anywhere, like I think the Air Force only sent us on a couple of areas to march for Anzac Day, but it certainly wasn't something I volunteered to do. So yeah, it was 34 years before I got it, and I think that my wife said, look, you know, she said you really should go out and you know, be proud of what you did and enjoy, you know, the company of the other people, and give them respect that the people deserve. That about the last probably 4 to 5 years that I have sort of joined the different groups, and now, you know, I look forward to, well, I can't march anymore, I get a ride, but I look forward to Anzac Day. And I'm in about 7 military clubs, you know, which I sort of don't participate in a lot, but a lot of the things I keep sort of for information and finding out what's going on. A lot I sort of put my book through, so there's a bit of sort of income for the sort of club I do, you know, put in some for legacy and things like that. So you know, it's a contribution financially for things like that, which I enjoy. Then the battalion the 4R that I serve with, I now they have a reunion every 3 years, so I now try to get to those. I've been to the last 2. Now I think we've got one in January in Rotorua's, which I've already, you know, paid for and all set to go for that, and catch up with some guys. Some of the guys I know now I hadn't seen for 35, 36 years, so I'll catch up with them again, which will be good. But I'd caught up with guys I hadn't seen for over 30 years, you know, folks like Borneo Bob in the last time. I hadn't seen him for over 30 years. So yeah, so it's really good. It's something I now enjoy and look really forward to.
Well, I'm sure that your New Zealand trip is going to be lots of fun for you. And
yes, it'll be good to sort of catch up with the group again. You know, it's a long time between sort of meetings, but we're all sort of getting older, and so, you know, 3 years is better than nothing, sort of thing. So yeah.
Well, thanks very much, Tony, for talking to us today for the archive.
Oh, thank you.
You've certainly led a very interesting and diverse life.
Oh, well, some might say that, but I don't think so. But I just think it's something nice to leave for my kids and future generations. And I just hope that, you know, people sort of, you know, any sort of military thing don't have to go through that. But it's hard to say, you know, with this places like Iraq and that now, I don't sort of, you know, I don't sort of envy those poor guys. You know, I think it's any war's a horrible war, but this new terrorism side of it is just, you know, very, very hard.
Glad you're out of the business then.
Yes, I am, but on the other hand too, it affects us all, you know, and we can't sort of turn a blind eye to it. But it's a shame now we've still got to, you know, put young men into those sort of positions. But I just feel sorry for them and their families that they've got to go through that. It's a shame we sort of can't live in peace with the different people, but it's obviously never going to happen. We're always going to need soldiers, so. You know, the best we can do is train them the best to keep alive and do the job as good as possible.
I'm just thinking we're fortunate to have stories from soldiers such as yourself on the archive.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.